It's just about making sure that developers and planners get together and say, right, how do we make this work? How do we get it over the line? Instead of some long protracted disagreement. And that's why you get all the cost and the delay and people not building their homes. If we don't do this, Labour can forget the idea of building 1.5 million homes. They've got no chance in hell of building that number.
OK, let's turn to our top story here on Times Radio at 4:06. Andy Burnham wants to build the largest number of council houses since the Second World War. He's giving mayors across England new powers to overrule local councils to force through plans to build houses, tower blocks and skyscrapers. The change would apply to proposals with more than 150 homes, more than 15,000 square metres of commercial office space or buildings over 30 metres high. Mayors in 13 areas, including Manchester, Liverpool, the West of England and the West Midlands, will gain similar powers to Sir Sadiq Khan in London, who is already able to call in planning decisions. The plans were revealed by Prime Minister Andy Burnham in an interview with the Sunday Times Northern editor David Collins.
The situation we're trying to get to is just giving local areas more grip over the most fundamental thing that their areas need, which is homes that people can afford.
Yeah.
The growth journey won't work if it's being done without that fundamental change to housing beneath it. And we've certainly learnt that in Greater Manchester. If you look around the country, most local authorities, I think I'm right in saying this, are still in a position where they are losing more council and social homes than they are building.
Right. Yeah.
And I think we've got to face up to this as a country. The grip of the housing crisis tightens every year.
What do you think is causing that?
Right to buy has continued to reduce the public housing stock, and we've never got into a position where we've been building to replace. Obviously, that wasn't allowed in the first instance. The proceeds couldn't be used. There was, as a better period in the 2000s, but we're still not set up to build those homes. And what I'm trying to do is set up all parts of England to build those council and social homes.
So part of what you're going to do is mayors are going to get these call-in powers, aren't they? So that if a council is objecting, then they can call it in and push it through.
That's the London system, yeah. So that is being announced today.
Can you
see that will speed up delivery, and that's a very deliberate move to speed up housing delivery.
That was the Prime Minister Andy Burnham speaking to David Collins, and you can read David Collins' full interview with him at thetimes.com. Joining me to discuss all this are Paul Bristow, who is the Conservative Mayor of Cambridgeshire and Peterborough, Andrew Southall, Reform Councillor for Wollaston and Stourbridge Town, and Rico Wojtulewicz, the Director of Policy at the National Federation of Builders. Good afternoon, gentlemen.
Afternoon.
Let's talk to you first, Rico, if we may then. How difficult is it to get volume projects like housing estates of more than 150 homes or tall skyscrapers away when it comes to getting that planning permission?
Well, they're actually the easiest to get planning for because historically we used to have a lot of competition in the market, a lot of small and medium-sized house builders delivering a number of projects. Maybe that size of 150 would be split across a few regional builders. Now we are seeing, you look at the data, more and more sites delivered over 150, and actually it's kind of 250 and above. So I think this is a good move. And if you kind of track back to 1919 in the Housing Act, the Addison Act as people called it, the way we delivered those post-war homes was with such an approach. But there is a slight issue whereby, where does the planning politics of land use then head? Does it head on the sites of fewer than 150? And do we then grind to a halt? Because sites of 150 and above, typically it's landowners bringing them forward, not the actual builder. And so the planning process is a beast, which very few people understand.
Yeah, well, I mean, this is the thing, and hopefully we'll try and get some clarity because we've got a good amount of time to talk this through. So just tell us then, if you're saying it's actually easier to get these large developments away, are you even talking about, say, skyscrapers in city centres? That's easier than trying to get small developments on greenfield sites away, is it?
No, they are particularly difficult. So we actually came up with a report called Community Density, where we effectively the local authority says, well, we want all these things, rooftop terraces, underground parking, creche, commercial space, split level housing, and then the developer makes it work. The way they make it work is by building tall. Unfortunately, it's very difficult to get planning, and also the regulatory regime, fire and Grenfell regulations and policies have made it really difficult. And people say, well, we don't want to build all the green belt, but also don't build too tall and overlook us. So local authorities typically just don't build them. And so, even councils, when they build council houses, they might have a development that could have a tall tower, but they build 10 homes because it's much easier to not upset the local people than it is to actually build the homes for the local people.
OK, let's bring in Andrew Southall, who is a local councillor. Andrew, how do you feel about powers being taken out of local councils' hands, handed to mayors, who will then perhaps give permission for tall, unsightly towers to be built? I mean, I don't know when you were last in Manchester, but when I went up there recently, I was staggered by how many high-rise buildings and skyscrapers were being built there. Now, maybe that's right for a second city, but even so, people have strong feelings about them, don't they?
Yes, and I'm looking at the proposals as basically taking a decision from one group of politicians and handing it to another group of politicians. I don't see the whole point in that. I think the system that we've got, where the local representatives discuss this on behalf of the residents and take into consideration everything else, is better. We're just moving power away to someone more distant. I do agree we need to look at streamlining our planning processes in the 21st century, but we also have to be considerate about keeping our community appearance as it is in terms of what buildings we want. And I'm going to go over historically as well. We have had massive redevelopment projects in the past in Dudley Borough. I believe in the early 2000s. The Priory estate in Dudley was completely redeveloped, and that was an example of good planning policy that completely brought that area into the 21st century. And we could go even further back to an area called the Mambles in Dudley Borough, where in the early 20th century, they were so run down and so destitute that people lived with their floorboards above the sewers. So I do empathise with having to increase our housing and our housing quality, but I would like to see our local councillors' voice still taken into account.
Yeah, so are you saying that actually moving power from local councillors to regional politicians or people with a lot of executive powers, such as regional mayors, is not necessarily the answer? It's actually making it easier just to build the houses in the first place?
I think it's going to bypass what we as councillors might want to say. It may drain out the voices of our local residents. We are elected to represent them and take their concerns. It's by no means to be Mr. NIMBY or Mr. No all the time, but it's to give context and discussion to each planning application on behalf of those who elected us.
OK, Paul Bristow.
Can I come in there just very quickly?
Is that Rico?
Yeah,
come in.
Planning doesn't work like that. So councillors expressing their opinion, if it meets local policy and typically gets recommended by the planner, you effectively got a fight between the council and the developer, and the developer always wins if it meets local policy. And then what happens is the council pays costs. And so, yes, I understand representation, but if you meet policy, why have this long protracted fight where you end up making the development cost more and actually reduce the amount of social homes? So I understand representation, but in practice, that's not the way it works. And so calling in a strategic development and getting it done locally because you've set the planning rules, that kind of design-led approach actually is probably the better way. I know it's not comfortable to hear, but it's the reality of how planning works.
Just assume that no one knows anything who's listening to this about planning and how the process works. Just take it through it step by step. A proposal goes forward, the council votes on it. If the council votes against, am I right in then saying it goes to regional officials who call it in and make a decision? And if it's a major development, it could be called in by Secretary of State. Is that right?
Sort of. It typically goes, the planner first decides whether it should be get permission or not. It goes then to the council, who then makes a decision as to the council members, the committee members on the planning department, and the council representatives. They make a decision as to what they want to do with it, whether there's amendments that are needed. If the developer disagrees, they just take it higher. And if it meets all local policies, the planning inspectorate, they're the ones that say yes or no. If they say yes, goes ahead. If they say no, or it's very large and strategic, it can be called in by the Secretary of State, and then they make the decision.
Right, and there seems to be, some people would argue, a democratic deficit there because unelected officials are making a decision based on rules, and they tend to be often remote from the communities where these developments are meant to be taking place. Let's bring in Paul Bristow, who has been waiting patiently, Conservative Mayor of Cambridgeshire and Peterborough. Paul, before these policy changes were announced by Andy Burnham, what involvement in planning do you or does your department have in your area?
Well, we have to create what is called a spatial development strategy, which is a strategic planning document, if you like, for my region. And it differs from a local plan in the fact that what it does, it looks at a region of 1 million people rather than, say, an area of 100,000 people. And instead of saying, well, 20,000 homes must be built in this particular place, it allows you to pick areas of growth. What areas are well suited for growth? What areas across the region aren't well suited for growth? And you can plan it much more strategically. But what we're talking about here isn't new. This has been happening in London for some time. The London plan works exactly like that. Now, the reason people aren't building in London is for a host of other reasons. I think the London plan is too complicated. But ultimately, what happens is, with a mayor having these call-in powers, as has occurred in London, developers and planners, where they are at loggerheads, are encouraged to try and find a way because of the sort of threat of a regional mayor being able to come in and intervene. Sadiq Khan rarely uses that power, and regional mayors, I would imagine, would rarely use that power. It's just about making sure that developers and planners get together and say, right, how do we make this work? How do we get it over the line? Instead of some long protracted disagreement. And that's why you get all the cost and the delay and people not building their homes. If we don't do this, Labour can forget the idea of building 1.5 million homes. They've got no chance in hell of building that number.
Yeah, I mean, both you and Andrew sound quite lukewarm about the proposal in general, and of course we have yet to see the specifics of it. But do you agree, Paul, in principle with the idea of getting regional mayors involved in planning decisions of large scale, whether it's skyscrapers, tower blocks or areas of more than 150 homes?
Well, I'm not lukewarm. I think it's a very sensible move, right, because it will do what, as I said, basically, it would encourage developers and planners to get together and say, what do we need to do to get this over the line? I know 2 or 3, and I'm not going to tell you what they are and what they look like because of presumption and legal issues, but there are 2 or 3 developments across Cambridgeshire and Peterborough that if I had these powers, I'd make it clear that I would approve tomorrow if it came before me. And I'm hoping that would focus minds at a local level for planners and developers to get together and say, what do we need to do to get these much needed homes, family homes, over the line so people have got somewhere they wish to live?
Doesn't that put people like Andrew in a very difficult position? Because if they're fielding lots of local opposition to a large development and they are trying to represent the people who voted them into office, they are unable to get their voices heard because you can just steamroller them.
But what Rico said a minute ago was right. If it applies to the local plan, if it follows all the rules laid out in the local plan, it's very difficult for councillors to turn it down in the long term. But what it does, it just creates a loggerhead where councils will create excuses not to pass it. It will be failed at a local planning meeting, or it may not come forward because of administrative delay, and we just go on and we go on. And ultimately, developers will get it because they'll appeal to the planning inspectorate. It's about speeding that process up. If local councillors understand that there is the threat of a mayor coming in and saying, we should be doing this, maybe they'll get together with the developers and they'll come up with a compromise, meet in the middle and build the thing, and we'll get more homes. But ultimately as well, this is also going to affect key infrastructure eventually, things like train stations, things like data centres, things such as that as well. So it's not just about homes, it's about infrastructure as well.
Andrew, do you like the sound of what Paul is talking about?
Yeah, I follow what he's saying from his perspective. Infrastructure is all I want to build on that. You need your trains as well. There's one thing I'm kind of getting involved in, talking to the pre-metro operations to expand the metro line from Stowe. So if you're going to be building houses, you need people more connected. I'm just talking from a consideration point here. I mean, come to Stourbridge, there are sinkholes opening up all over the roads everywhere. And I do get concerned about overdeveloping Stourbridge and more cars on these roads which down the line will need more money to throw at fixing it all for the increased traffic. And I'd like to say for Andy Burnham as well, there's a key point being missed here, and that there is a demand side as well as the supply side. And we've had the Boris wave migration that has artificially exploded our population in his final years as Prime Minister. We do need to talk about why we are needing to build so much in the first place. I'm not saying it's the only reason. We have underbuilt for many decades, but we do need to be having a look at the population control.
OK, Rico, have a listen to this. This is a message from Lisa, who says, "Good afternoon. Just a minor little detail that nobody has either addressed or answered, and that's not your fault. It's because I haven't asked it. Who is actually going to build all these houses? Is there a large qualified workforce somewhere out there waiting for the call to pick up tools and start building? Also, I read somewhere there's a shortage of building materials. Can you put Lisa's mind at rest, Rico, or has she put her finger on a serious problem?"
It's one of my favourite topics, and the reason is because 8 in 10 construction apprentices are trained by small and medium-sized enterprises, and in the house building industry we used to build 40%, and we trained more bricklayers and carpenters than across the whole industry than we do entire construction apprentices today, when SMEs only build 9% of homes. So she's correct. We will adapt. Around 70% of construction materials are actually made in the UK. So there are positives, but this lack of understanding about where apprentices come from, how they train, how they be retained is a problem. And it's no point every government throwing money at training, because if there's 1 million people being trained but only 100,000 jobs, then you're going to leave a lot of people out. So you need to enable these SMEs, small and medium, so building up to 150 homes. They need to be enabled. And actually, this government has put in place what's called the medium-sized site. I'm not going to, make planning all complicated for everyone, but trust me, the nightmare and the beast. And if you actually understood it, you'd realise that the whole system is actually geared for the big builders, and they're not monopolising it. The system enables them to create this kind of dominance. But unless we enable our small and medium-sized enterprises, no, we're not going to train enough people, and we're going to be reliant on immigration. And we just need to work out how we fix that. And what politicians need to understand is it takes 3 years to train somebody and 2 years for them to become really competent. So we've got that far, and that's the problem, is that's their whole timing in government potentially. So what are they going to do to fix it if in 5 years that's when you start to see the benefits? And there's a last thing: stop treating industry as cash cows and whacking on cost after cost after cost. Sites of 2 homes now are completely unviable, and people are going, do I build 5 homes, or do I try and get 30, 40, pay £150,000 to get a no, and hope down the line maybe I can get a planning hook at some point? Enable the SMEs, and you'll start to fix the workforce. It's a fair point she made.
OK, Rico, thank you. And also thank you to Andrew Southall from Wollaston and Stourbridge, a Reform councillor there. Paul, I'm going to give you the very last word if you could make it. I feel like we barely scratched the surface on this, despite the fact we've been talking about it for 20 minutes. But Paul, as a Conservative mayor, as someone who will have more powers if Andy Burnham's proposals go ahead, what would be the first thing that you would seek to do in Cambridgeshire and Peterborough?
Well, I'm looking to set up a vehicle called a Mayoral Development Corporation in the city of Peterborough. We've already got one in Cambridge, where we're looking to build lots of new homes, lots of new infrastructure, because Cambridge is a place where people want to live. The issue with Peterborough is we have land values and viability challenges, and we've got land assembly challenges, depend, as you quite rightly said, that whether we give planning permission for something depends whether the chair of planning gets out on the wrong side of the bed that morning or not. We can't run a country like that. And if we want the city centre, the great people of Peterborough and Cambridgeshire deserve, we're going to build up, we're going to have a Mayoral Development Corporation, and we're going to think big.
Paul Bristow, the Conservative Mayor of Cambridgeshire and Peterborough, thank you very much indeed. Peter has WhatsApped in to say, have we not learnt anything from some of the high-rise disasters of the 1960s? We could streamline planning processes without taking powers from local councils. Devolution is supposed to be about devolving power downwards, not sucking up powers to mayors that nobody asked for. And Anne says, re this house building hysteria. Just how ugly does Burnham want to make this country? Travelling the length and breadth of the UK, it's just a hideous mess of fast food outlets, trashy shops and characterless housing estates that either nobody can afford or nobody is buying. Repurpose the deserted town centres and leave the countryside alone. Do please keep your comments coming